Hey everyone, welcome to Victory Fellowship Church. It's April the 19th, 2020. We're still in the middle of our coronavirus lockdown, so we're doing another podcast. I hope you're doing well. We want to kind of build on where we were on a podcast I did a couple of days ago. So we're going to be in the book of Joshua. So I'm going to ask you if we'll turn your Bibles to the book of Joshua. Chapter 4. Today we want to talk about memorial stones, or the memorial stones that we see in this, and how that translates into our lives. So we want to go there this morning. In Joshua 4, we're looking at the rebirth of a nation. And I call it a rebirth instead of a transition because so much died in the wilderness. There's a real stark contrast in the crossing over into the promised land and the crossing over out of Egypt. And so I want to hit on some of those things this afternoon and have us really look and inspect our lives with the stuff that we're going through as a world today. And I definitely think we'll be doing life different on the other side of this as a global community. If it was just the United States and everything was going on, I'd say maybe we overshot the runway. But with all of the whole global community, the whole world jumping in on this, it's definitely going to shift everything in the way we do life. So we want to look at some things and draw some comparisons, some contrasts as we study in Joshua, and to see how the Lord speaks to us. I think I've got a few significant words to release for us in this moment. So we'll just let's zone in and see what the Lord says. As I said a while ago, I call it a rebirth and not a transition because so much died in the wilderness. A generation that operated in murmuring and unbelief, a slave mentality, an old land. All those things died, and they were embarking on a new way of life. And I think one of the crucial things for us as we look in this, the coronavirus and the moving out of this eventually, and the way we do life again and all of that, is if we approach it simply from a Exodus standpoint and say that I want to endure, I want to make it through, I want to survive, and then maybe allow God to kill some stuff in my life, then, or not in my life, but kill some things that had me enslaved. But if I don't come in and have a rebirth in this, then 2 years from now, my life's not going to look any different. So I want us to consider when the children of Israel were coming out of Egypt, and we talked about this a good bit in our last podcast, and how it was a gift that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And the way that the children of Israel, the things that God did out of this, and we looked at the gifts that he gives us in the midst of adversity. And there are a lot of gifts that God's giving us right now in the midst of this coronavirus and everything that's going on. And it's up to us on us seeing those through the proper lens and then responding correctly. But I look at the children of Israel in that setting in the book of Exodus, and I see God delivering them from something. I see them coming out of Egypt. God's intent and God's design was for them to go into the promised land, to the land that he had promised Abraham. We'll call it the promised land he had promised Abraham, and to live and to flourish, to conquer and to colonize. And that was God's intent for them. And so he brought them out of the nation of Egypt. Pharaoh's army came against them. We all know the story of the Red Sea Exodus. And we talked about what a gift that was. But what we have to realize is that while God killed the army that was pursuing the children of Israel, I don't really see anything in the children of Israel dying. I don't see any rebirth in them. And I think that's significant. We're looking at the two memorials in the book of Joshua and the significance of those memorials, but there were no memorials that God told the children of Israel to put up at the Red Sea crossing. It was not intended to be a thing that launched them into where they were supposed to be. It was simply supposed to be a closure on the strength of their enemies and coming against them and all of this stuff. Because we know historically as we study the children of Israel in this time period, that while the army of Egypt was destroyed and they did not come against them militarily, the mindset of Israel and that generation never changed. They still had a slave mentality. They still had a longing for the things of Egypt. And if you think about it, how many different times did they come in and they longed? They said, man, why'd you bring us out in the wilderness to die? At least we had graves in Egypt. Why did you bring us out here and all we're getting is manna? You know, we miss the onions, the leeks, and all of these herbs and stuff that we had in Egypt. At least our pots had those in them when we were in Egypt and all of this stuff. So there was still a longing that was in the nation of Israel for the familiarity of what they used to have. And the fear that I have right now is that many people, many Christians will come out of this time that we're in. I really don't know what to call it, season that we're in. It's bigger than a quarantine and all that. But this season that we're in, we're going to come out of this and we will allow God to kill some specific things that are in our circumstances, but we won't allow him to kill things that are in us that need rebirth. If you really think about it, God did not kill Egypt in the Red Sea crossing. He simply destroyed their army. Egypt still existed. And in the fact that Egypt still existed, there was still opportunity for the children of Israel, if they so chose. They could still go back there and enslave themselves voluntarily. And my fear in this, the season that we're in and the thing that we're going through, and everybody's talking about, oh, I'm going to do life different and all of this stuff and everything. And when God killed the army in Egypt, all he did was take the teeth out of the enemy. But the enemy was still alive. And I'm afraid what we'll do is we'll allow God to temporarily take the teeth out of these things that have enslaved us. Whether it's our stupid schedules or our ambitions or all of these things that we place such significance on, we are forced right now that God's taken the teeth out of these things. They don't control us because the social aspect of it is non-existent. And so the teeth has been removed, but it's still there. And my fear is that so many people, when this is over, will immediately fall right back into the old lifestyle. And their life won't look any different a year from now than it did before all of this started, or 2 years from now. And a lot of people say that's a good thing in their life, if you're content in that. But I look and I see a lot of people in life, and I've been one of those people that has been enslaved to schedule, been enslaved to busyness, been enslaved to financial pressures, been enslaved to all of these things that we have allowed to eventually, consume our whole process of doing life. And so that's one of my fears in this. I really want you to think about that, and I want you to spend some time and ponder and meditate and realize that God killed the Egyptian army, but he didn't kill Egypt. And if we're not careful, we'll go back, because there will be a longing. And I hear it with a lot of people that, I miss this, and I miss this, and I miss this, and I miss that. And I'll be honest with you, there's very little that we're having to do without right now that I miss. I do miss going to a good restaurant and getting a meal. I do miss coming to church and fellowshipping with my church family. I miss being around people in that aspect. But the other things, all the stuff that we're so used to, it's not had an effect on me. And maybe that's means I was in a healthier place than some people. I don't know. But I just want you to think about those things and consider that and ponder that. Recently I told someone, we were just talking about life and where we were and all of that. And I told them that I felt as if I was being born again on a daily basis. I said when I turned 50 that my life, I was saved in my 20s. Asked Jesus to come into my heart, forgive me of my sins. So the way that we call born again, it happened to me when I was in my 20s. But I said when I turned 50, and Lori and I had been in ministry for over 20 years, and when I turned 50, that God did such a radical work in our lives. I said, I felt like my life started over again when I was 50. I really felt like I was born again when I was 50. And God has been in such a rapid pace in our life with the way things have continued to unfold and to move and progress and all of that stuff. And when I say rapid pace, I don't mean that in a derogatory way, not in a busyness way, but God has just moved at such a pace that now I don't feel like it was a decade thing. I feel like it's, I feel like it's a daily thing. And I think that's what the word talks about when it says we go from glory to glory to glory to glory. And so I feel like in my life, I feel like that I'm being born again on a daily basis. It's a constant death, burial, resurrection, death, burial, resurrection, death, burial, resurrection. And it's not a painful thing, but it's a glorious thing. And so God, in feeling this way and being in this place, God began to speak to me about the significance of the death, burial, and resurrection. He began to show me the lack of it in the book of Exodus, but the very clear example in the book of Joshua. And so we want to take a look at that. So we want to come into Joshua 4. I'm going to read some scripture. There's 24 verses, so bear with me. I will try to read it fairly quickly. Read along with me. And I'll be reading out of the King James this morning or this afternoon. In the last verse in chapter 3, it said, "And the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of Jordan. And all the Israelites passed over on dry ground until all the people were passed clean over Jordan. It came to pass when all the people were clean passed over Jordan, that the Lord spake unto Joshua, saying, Take you 12 men out of the people, out of every tribe a man, and command you them, saying, Take you hence out of the midst of Jordan, out of the place where the priest's feet stood firm." And everybody understands this is talking about the passage of the Jordan River out of the wilderness into the promised land. So that's where we are contextually this morning or this afternoon. And in verse 3 he says, "And command you them, saying, Take you hence out of the midst of Jordan, out of the place where the priest's feet stood firm, 12 stones. And you shall carry them over with you, and leave them in the lodging place, where you shall lodge this night." Then Joshua called the 12 men whom he had prepared of the children of Israel, out of every tribe a man. And Joshua said unto them, "Pass over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of Jordan. Take you up every man of you a stone," not every man in Israel, but one from each tribe, 12 men. "Take you up every man of you a stone upon his shoulder." So it's something they're shouldering here. It's not a rock that they're putting in the pocket. So get a mental picture. He said, "I want you to get a significant enough stone that you have to shoulder it to be able to carry it out. According unto the number of the tribes of the children of Israel. This may be a sign among you, that when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, What mean ye by these stones? Then you shall answer them, that the waters of Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over Jordan, the waters of Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be for a memorial unto the children of Israel forever. And the children of Israel did so as Joshua commanded, and took up 12 stones out of the midst of Jordan, as the Lord spake unto Joshua, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, and carried them over with them unto the place where they lodged, and laid them down there. And Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests which bare the ark of the covenant stood, and they are there unto this day. For the priests which bare the ark stood in the midst of Jordan, until everything was finished, that the Lord commanded Joshua to speak unto the people, according to all that Moses commanded Joshua. And the people hasted and passed over. And it came to pass in verse 11, when all the people were clean passed over, that the ark of the Lord passed over, and the priest in the presence of the people. And the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh passed over armed before the children of Israel, as Moses spake unto them. About 40,000 prepared for war passed over before the Lord unto battle to the plains of Jericho. I want to make a side note right here. These 2.5 tribes that it said 40,000 of their men prepared for battle crossed over with the other 9.5 tribes. These were the 2.5 tribes that chose to stay on the other side of the Jordan. They said it's good enough. I always say that it was they were living in a place of compromise. They were still identified with the children of Israel. They were still actually went to go to war with the children of Israel. They sent 40,000 warriors. Moses said, y'all can live here if you want to, but you've got to send warriors to help your brethren fight. And I feel like there's a high percentage of the church that lives in a place of compromise. They live in a place where they're saved, they're numbered among the tribes, if you will. They'll raise up a force if needed be and do these things, but their daily living is in a less than fulfill a spot that God has for them. They live in it's an inferior place, and I say inferior not based on comparison with a life that I would live or someone else would live, but it's inferior based on a comparison of what God has for them. They always live short of God's heart and design for them, of His, not His expectations, but His heart for them. And, they choose to, they choose to live in this place. And it was good land. I'm not saying it was bad land. They weren't living in a dump. They weren't living in unproductive land. They said it was good pasture for their cattle, good grazing for their cattle. That's a relative term because that area is very arid. It would be like Wyoming. But they said it was good for cattle, and so they chose to stay there. I find it just a couple of points in that are a bit ironic and even humorous to me is the children of these 2.5 tribes that came over. When Joshua told a leader from each tribe to get a stone and carry it with them, 2 of these tribes were represented in that. And they picked up a stone. They had a guy that picked up a rock, and they carried the rock, and they carried it to Gilgal, because we'll see in a minute that's where the camp was, their new base of operations were. They carried it there. They were numbered among the children of Israel. They were numbered among the people that were in the covenant relationship, and but their memorial wasn't where they lived. And it was like, you go over here, and yes, you're part of us, but when you leave this place and you choose to go back, which these warriors did after the conquest with Jericho and Ai and all of this, when they went back, it's kind of like your stone staying here. And I think a lot of people are living in a separated place. I think I can say it'd be a separated place from the high places that God, the word says that we sit in heavenly places. We're seated in heavenly places with Christ Jesus. And I just believe that a lot of people today they have that lofty place, but they're not living there. And one thing that's kind of humorous to me that I'd not even ever considered that until today, as I was spending time this morning studying and with the Lord and all of that, was when the children of Israel, these 2.5 tribes, when the 40,000 warriors went across with the rest of the people that chose to live in the promised land, they were supernaturally given passage across the Jordan River. God dried it up for them. And they walked across on dry ground like everybody else. When they chose to go back onto the other side, they were on their own. I don't know if they had to wait till the flood waters rescinded and were there for an extended period of time until they could cross, or it was just kind of like, man, we just got it, because they didn't have women and children, and maybe they just stripped down to their, buckskin. It's like, man, we're going to just have to get it on our own. But it's like God will supernaturally carry us to places, but if we choose to go back to the inferior things, we're on our own. You got to figure that path out yourself. You make that way yourself. I had rather travel the King's Highway. I'd rather travel the King's Highway. I'd rather, the word says that thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. And I had rather follow that and this supernatural provision and supernatural direction than being on my own going back to the lesser things. So that's just some side notes of those 2.5 tribes. So let's finish on verse 14 and read these last few verses. On that day the Lord magnified Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they feared him as they feared Moses all the days of his life. And the Lord spake unto Joshua, saying, command the priests that bear the ark of the testimony that they come up out of Jordan. Joshua therefore commanded the priests, saying, Come you up out of Jordan. And it came to pass, when the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord were come up out of the midst of Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet were lifted up onto the dry land, that the waters of Jordan returned unto their place, and flowed over all his banks, as they did before. And the people came up out of Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and encamped in Gilgal, in the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they took out of Jordan did Joshua pitch in Gilgal. Now, this is about 6 miles away, 5 to 6 miles away. So we'll come back and speak a lot more on that in a moment. Verse 21, And he spake unto the children of Israel, saying, When your children shall ask their fathers in time to come, saying, What mean these stones? Then you shall let your children know, saying, Israel came over this Jordan on dry land. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of Jordan from before you until you were passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up from before us until we were gone over, that all the people of the earth might know the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty, that ye might fear the Lord your God forever. So, a lot of verses there. I want us to, as I said a while ago, I want us to look at, and I've got like 7 pages of notes here. So I want us to look at these memorial stones. In this scripture, there are 2 different memorials that we see. As I said a while ago, there were no memorials erected at the Red Sea crossing. The only memorial was the dead bodies of the Egyptian army on the seashore. It was a memorial of God's deliverance. And while God was establishing an identity for Israel that we talked about the other day as God's chosen people, and while he was establishing a history with that generation, I don't see anything dying in Israel that day. No death, so no rebirth. Their enemies died, but they were not born again as a nation. Let me read that one more time. I don't see anything dying in Israel that day. We're talking about the Red Sea Exodus. No death, so no rebirth. Their enemies died, but they were not born again. I'm going to just read some of these notes because I feel like they're significant. From these times that we are living in, God doesn't want to just kill the things that have enslaved you. And you fill in the blank on what those things are. If there's no rebirth in you, there will always be a longing for the familiarity of the bondage. As I said a while ago, how many times did this generation of Israel long for the things of Egypt? Even though the Egyptian army died at the Red Sea, the Egypt that was in these people did not die. I'll read that again. Even though the Egyptian army died at the Red Sea, the Egypt that was in these people did not die. My prayer is that the Egypt in us will die during this, or else we will simply return voluntarily to our former captors. No need for an army if we volunteer to go back. God simply removed the teeth of the captor. So I want you to think on that point. There is no need for an army if you enslave yourself voluntarily. Jesus removed the sting of death. He removed the teeth of the law, the curse that was on us. But yet every day we come into agreement with the enemy, and there's no need for it to have teeth. But we come in and we're submissive and we yield. And that's out of convenience. That's out of familiarity. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of it's out of ignorance. And so I want us to look at these things. There's really no difference in Egypt or Babylon. It's just a different name, same result. So what you do with this opportunity is up to you. It's up to me what I do with this opportunity. Do I allow a death, burial, resurrection, or do I just allow this be a momentary thing where this army was destroyed? Because I promise you, what started happening in Egypt with the next generation was immediately they started raising up another army. And if all you do is allow your enemies to be defeated and there's no rebirth in you, then there'll be one enemy after another enemy after another enemy or after another enemy. It may look like Egypt. It may look like the Medo-Persian Empire. It may look like Babylon. It may look like Rome. It may look like a whatever. but there will be another army that will continually rise up in your life and pose a threat to you, to enslave you. So it all gets back to the death, burial, and resurrection in us. Now, getting back to Joshua 4, as I said earlier, no memorials in the Red Sea, Exodus, but 2 in the rebirth of the passage into the Promised Land. I talked about the 2.5 tribes, and then the rest of the entire nation of Israel is crossing over. So let's look at this picture and let's talk about this for a few moments. A lot of you that are listening or watching are very, very familiar with this story, but God told Joshua, he said, tell the priest to take the Ark of the Covenant, which they bore on their shoulders. And the Ark of the Covenant was it was God's residing place. It was symbolically where there were significant things that were in this Ark of the Covenant, and it was his presence that went with them. Now, sometimes it looked like a cloud by day or a fire by night, but there was this tangible box that they carried that had things in it that represented the presence of God. Very, very significant. Obviously, it was Old Covenant, not New Covenant. So we have a greater thing now. We have the Holy Spirit living inside of us. So I don't have to carry a box around with our company of people. We have Him living inside of us. But Joshua told the children of Israel, he said, get ready, consecrate yourself. We are about to cross over into the Jordan River. And so he told the priests, he said, take the Ark of the Covenant, pass before the people, and you go to the Jordan River. He said, when the sole of your feet touches the edge of the water, we're going to see the waters are going to stand back. Obviously, the downstream just does its thing, but upstream, everything's going to be stood up on a wall. It will stand at attention to what's going on. So the priests came in, and sure enough, as they touched the water with their feet, it held back. And the nation crossed on dry ground. The priest stood in the middle of the riverbed with the Ark of the Covenant. And so I want you to get this picture. They're standing in the riverbed with the Ark of the Covenant. We talked about this the other day. And the entire nation of Israel crosses over. Hundreds of thousands of people and all of their stuff. And the word said that when they finished crossing over, then the Lord told Joshua to do these memorials, that they were going to make 2 memorials. He had actually told Moses earlier, I think in the book of Deuteronomy, that they were that he wanted them to establish a memorial here. And so I get back to my thing of God did not instruct them to do any memorials at the Exodus of the Red Sea. But he did want memorials at the death, burial, and resurrection and going into the Promised Land. They were being brought out of something in the Exodus, and it was glorious. It was supernatural. It was God showing up on a big-time scale as far as being their deliverer, being their redeemer. But we see so many types of Christ in this Joshua experience with memorial stones. And I think that God is trying to emphasize the difference and the significance. So many people want God to act on their behalf. They want God to come in. I mean, look at how we've been praying during this crisis. I bet most of you, if you're like me and everybody else, you probably came in and to start with your prayers were like, God, watch over my family and protect us that nobody gets sick. And, be with the ones that are sick. So we need your, we need your provision. God, protect our resources. Protect my job. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to lose our business. I don't want our company to go out of business that I work for, whether it's IBM or Delta or whoever. I need my company to stay because this is the way I make my living and all that. And we start praying along those lines. And this is no disrespect to the name Jehovah Jireh, because I love the names of God. But God told me not too far back, he said, I want you to approach me a lot better than Jireh. I want you to approach me in a lot broader sense, a lot deeper sense than Jireh. If Lori came to me, my wife, if she came to me and her approach to me and her her viewpoint of me was that I was her provider, whether that is financial or whether it is security, safety, or provision or whatever, and she simply looked at me as her provider, then she's missing out on the intimate relationship aspect. And I think we come in a lot of times and we want the God of angel armies, but we're not really looking for the bridegroom. We're not looking for the Song of Solomon. We are not looking for when he comes in Isaiah 60 and 61, and he says, I want to marry myself to you, and I want to marry myself to your land. And we're like, look, man, I just really want to get saved and get out of hell. I just really want you to deliver me out of this stuff. I want you to be provision. I want you to be these things. But I want to tell you something, man, going into a deep relationship with you, that cost me a whole lot more. And so God in this is emphasizing the difference in just him being a deliverer that we see in the Red Sea Exodus, and him being the God of promise, that I promised this to Abraham generations ago. And now I'm fulfilling my promise because you're my covenant people. Not just I'm going to protect you, but I'm entering into this deep covenant relationship with you. And so in this, God said, this requires some memorials. There are some significant things in our life that I believe we lose the significance of over time because we fail to build memorials. I have known, and I've been guilty of this on occasion in my life, but I have known so many people that God would do something amazing in their life. It was more than just a God wink. It was more than just a God kiss. It was God's coming in and saying, I have joined myself to you, and done something so supernatural and so significant in their life. And it might be a prophetic word that comes to pass in a significant way that changes the trajectory of their life. And because they fail to build proper memorials and revisit those memorials, it is lost over the period of time. And I believe, I'm convinced, I know that there are things that are significant enough in our lives that they require us coming in and building memorials to those things, placing the proper weight on those things, placing the proper significance on those things. So he came in, and as I said earlier, after everyone had passed, the Lord told Joshua to have one man from each tribe take a stone out of the middle of the riverbed where the priests were, very important, and carry it on his shoulder to the place of encampment. Now this was Gilgal. It was between 5 and 6 miles away. Gilgal would become their new base of operations in the Promised Land. It would become the place where they based all of their conquest. It would be where they lived, where their families lived while they were in this year's process. It was a gathering point and a place where the soldiers would come back to. So it was where they lived. It was going to be their new starting point of colonization for the Promised Land. And it was 5 or 6 miles away. My mental picture, and I think probably the mental picture of so much of the church is, because I've even read it in commentaries and stuff, is that there were two memorials, and there was one in the river, and then there's one over here on the riverbank. And you can walk by on the riverbank, and you can see, man, there's the rocks out in the river when it's low water, and that's what that means. And here's the memorial on the bank right here. And that's not, in actuality, that's not the way it was. The Lord told Joshua to tell the men, the representatives from each tribe, to take these stones, these big stones, and I believe they were big stones, and carry them out of the riverbed on your shoulder. That was the only way they could carry them because of the weight of them, the significance of them. And he told me, he said, I want you to carry them to the place where we will camp. And so it's easy for us to take a memorial and just pile it right here. But the significance of the memorial is when we carry it back to where we live. We carry it with us on this journey. We carry it with us into this new beginning and this new life. And that takes a lot more effort because, I'll be honest with you, it's not hard to bring it out and just plop. I'm going to dump it right there. All right, that's good. Man, I did my part. But when your children see you carrying a stone, when your grandchildren see you carrying a stone, all of a sudden they see the significance of stone because they came out of Egypt and the only thing they carried was their stuff that was significant to them. You know, I mean, how many times that's the way people clean their garages out? They move. And when they move, they carry the significant stuff away, and the stuff that they say, I ain't carrying this to my new house, you know what? It goes in a roll-off or it gets donated to somebody. And when they're moving like that, they carry the significant stuff. So they were carrying the significant stuff, and here you've got this kid, and he's watching his father, his grandfather, and they're carrying their possessions and all of that. And he's carrying a rock. And he said, there's something significant about that rock. There's something significant. Maybe he didn't, out of 500,000 people, he didn't hear what the word of Joshua was. And so he says, Papa, what's the significance of that rock? What's the significance of that rock? Why are you carrying that rock? And why are you carrying it all the way up here? That don't make sense. You're hiking 6 miles. I don't know how many of you guys do much hiking, do much walking. But, me and Lori, we're trying to get in sheep shape for an upcoming hunt. And we got where we walk a good bit over at the hunting lease, through different terrain and up hills and all of this stuff. And we've got a 5-mile loop that we do on a consistent basis. And I can do the 5-mile loop. It's no problem. We try to shoot for a 17-minute mile or something like that and everything. My hip, I'm a little bit slower, so that's what we're shooting for and doing that. But no problem walking 5 to 6 miles. But I don't know about carrying a 40-pound rock on my shoulder or a 50-pound rock on my shoulder. I can even carry a backpack because that's part of our training. We got these backpacks and we'll carry backpacks. But when I'm carrying a physical rock on my shoulder, that seems, if you're someone looking from a carnal mindset in the nation of Israel, you're like, that don't really make sense. What difference does it make if I put a rock right here, if I carry it back to where we live? And that so often is where we fall short of the glory. Because it go back to the 2.5 tribes. What difference is this side of Jordan and the other side of Jordan? This side's good land. This side's good grazing for my cattle. This side, I can make a good living right here. Yeah, you can, but it's not the promised land. And I want to live in the promised land. I want to, even if it's a long process, if it's a harder process, if it's an old school process, whatever you want to call it, I want to follow what the Lord is saying on stuff. And they're carrying this rock, all of this distance, to the place where they encamp. And it's so significant. So I want us to think about that and look at that. Let me get back in my notes so I can get back on track. I can tell by the time of my podcast, this is getting a little bit easier preaching without crowds. I think the one other day was like an hour and 15 minutes. So the first one was like 20. I'm like, what do I do? I was kind of like Ricky Bobby. What do I do with my hands? But it's getting easier. But we come in and I believe that they carried the stones the same way that the priest carried the Ark of the Covenant on their shoulder the whole way. I don't believe they brought it on the shoulder out of the riverbed and then threw it on a cart. I believe they carried it as a significant symbol. They carried it the same way the priest carried the Ark of the Covenant on their shoulder. And then the word says that Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan as a memorial. So get this picture. The representatives of each tribe, they got a rock, stone, boulder, whatever they could carry. I believe it was significant. And they carried it out. They're over here on the bank. All of these, the children of Israel on the bank. They're about to go to their encampment, Gilgal. But before they go, the priests are still standing in the middle of the river. And as instructed by the Lord, then Joshua takes 12 stones. And Joshua makes a memorial in the middle of the river. Now, I believe personally, Joshua is a type of Christ in this, in his whole leading. And there's so many things in Joshua. He's a type of Christ. But I believe that this is something he did by himself. I don't believe that anybody helped Joshua set up a memorial for these 12 stones. I believe that when the Lord told him to do it, I believe only he could do it. I bet there were guys, that were like, man, let me come help. Because they had great fear, honor, respect for him. And I believe there were guys just chomping, let me help him. He said, no, this is something I have to do myself. Because the Lord told me to set up these stones as a memorial in the river. They're going to be covered with the river. Right now, the river is standing at attention. It is standing on edge. But this is something that I have to do. We see it now as a type of Christ. No one could pay the sin debt. No one could die the death that would do the proper atonement except Jesus Christ. None of the prophets, none of the, nobody. None of the apostles. It had to be Jesus. And I believe this had to be to Joshua in this. Now, I'm not sure where the stones came from. I don't know if they came from the other side, representing the old life. And because in this, he's doing this in the middle of the riverbed, but it's about to be buried. Okay, y'all getting this? It's about to be buried. It's about to be buried with the water. A type of the death, burial, and then the resurrection on the other side. So this is a type of burial. So I don't know if these rocks came from the old side, representing their past. I don't know if they came out of the riverbed and he pulled 12 out of the riverbed and put them in a different place in the riverbed as a sign of the place of their redemption, or if he got them from the other side and they represent the life that springs forth from death and burial. But wherever they came from, they were buried in the midst of the river, the passage of death to life. And Jesus did this for us in his death, burial, and resurrection. And I want you to imagine the beautiful picture of this as everyone watched Joshua place the stones in the middle of the river. I got messed up as I wrote this. The waters were forced to stand at attention as he did this. You got the priests that are standing here. They're holding the Ark of the Covenant, which is the presence of God. And it is holding the waters at attention while Joshua is coming in and he's placing memorial stones and saying, this is the place of new birth. This is the place of death, burial, and resurrection. In this generation that just came across that river, they don't have a slave mentality anymore. They were about to do two things. They were about to celebrate the Passover for the first time in a couple days on the new side, on the Promised Land side. And they were about to renew the identification covenant of circumcision. And they had not done that while they were in Egypt. They had not done that. And they were about to circumcise and start that again. Symbolic. This is what separates us. You know, how many times we heard that? Uncircumcised. When David's about to fight Goliath, he said, who is this uncircumcised Philistine? Well, they were, at that point, they were uncircumcised. Now they're about to renew that again. So they're coming in a newness of life. It's a new birth for them. And so Joshua is taking these stones and he's placing these stones in the riverbed. And the waters are forced to stand at attention. They can't cover that. That can't be buried until the presence of God allows it to, until it permits it to. And man, I just began to think about the way that hell was paralyzed. We think that hell was throwing all its fury on Jesus on the cross, and hell was in charge on the cross, and God wrenched control somewhere in when he went and took the keys to death, hell, and the grave, and he came out and he led captivity captive. We think somewhere in there God won and wrenched control and all that stuff. You remember when Pilate was talking with Jesus and he said, don't you realize that I have the power to set you free? And Jesus looked at him and he said, nobody has power over me. He said, I have the power to lay my life down freely if I so choose. And I want to tell you something. When Jesus was on Calvary's cross, when Jesus was in the midst of his Jordan River, as such, and what we're talking about in type today, hell was paralyzed. Hell was at a point where they were like, uh-oh, what have we done? Because he laid his life down freely. He gave up his spirit. They didn't take it from him. A Roman soldier didn't take it from him. A cat o' nine tails did not take it from him. Fatigue did not take it from him. He laid it down and he said, Tetelestai, it is finished, paid in full. And hell was held captive, paralyzed while he did that. What a beautiful picture that is. He said, I lay down and I give my life freely. And I just think about these waters of the Jordan River, and they are forced just to stand there and say, I'm designed to go down, to run through this riverbed, and I'm about to bury this thing, but I can't bury this thing until I have permission. And I love that there, that Joshua is sitting there, and he is meticulously picking the right stones and making a memorial and placing these stones. I don't know if he mortared them together, because in Deuteronomy it says, I want you to mortar these stones and write the law, write the scripture on them. You go back and study that in Deuteronomy, and I don't know if they did that at the ones in Gilgal, or if Joshua, it might have been a process where he's sitting there for 2 hours and doing all this. I mean, the whole time, the Jordan River cannot bury that until it gets heaven's permission. And then when he finishes, Joshua comes up out of the river. And when he finishes, the priests come out of the river. And the word says that as soon as the priest, that last priest, his foot hit the dry ground, it said then the waters were permitted to flow again. They were permitted to flow again. So we've got this memorial that's right out here in the middle. And then now we've got this second memorial. And this is where I think it is hugely, hugely significant for us today. Because the contrast of these two memorials is the first memorial, only Joshua could do it. The second memorial, the people had a part to play in it. They were bringing, he said, you take a representative out of each tribe and you have him get a stone where the priests are, carry it up out of the riverbed, take it to Gilgal, take it to where we're going to camp. And the people had a part in this. And I want you to say, I want you to know that God is for us, God is with us, God is leading us, God is guiding us, but we've got a part in this, guys. This race that we run, this journey of faith that we do, we come around and we default and lean so heavily on the sovereignty of God. And we say, well, if it's my time to go, or God's going to do it, he's going to do it, and I really don't have anything to say in it and all that stuff. And God is so looking for a people that will believe him, that will trust him, that will partner with him, that will come in and allow him to marry himself to them and to their land, and that will carry a stone. And so that's, the Lord just has been speaking to me all week about the significance of the fact that they carried the stones, the carrying of the stones. I'm going to read just a few more notes, and I'm going to wrap all this up. I've got 2 points that I want to make on this toward the and tying it all together. The significance of the carrying of the stones. As I said a while ago, Miriam danced a dance at the Red Sea Exodus, but that dance stayed there. They carried this memorial to where they lived. I have seen so many people experience the moving of God, experience the provision of God, experience the salvation of God, experience the deliverance of God. And I've seen them dance a dance, and I've seen them get excited. But you know what I've seen them fail to do is a high percentage of those people that I have seen experience and celebrate and do all of those things. A high percentage of those people are not even living kingdom pursuit right now. And it's because it was a natural thing to do to dance a dance and to celebrate. But it's a much harder thing to do to carry stones. And as I said a while ago, Gilgal was to become the base of their operations as they began the conquest and colonization of the Promised Land. It was where their families lived. Joshua did all the work on the memorial at the Jordan. Jesus did all the work at the cross. But they had a part in this one. They had a responsibility in this one. I thank God for the 2 memorials. He did his work, and it's everything. It brought us into this place. It made a way. You know, we talked about a few weeks ago when we were doing a live stream with some of the guys on the worship team, and we were talking about Waymaker, and he made a way for us in that. But on this one, we've got a part and we've got a responsibility. The word says, how shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? How shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? So there's 2 things that the Lord's pressing on me in this that I want to throw these out to you and take these as words for you for today, for now, not a historical study. But they carried the stone the full distance. It came home with them into their camp for their families to see. And will we carry this new birth into all areas of our life, the full distance? In the epistle, Paul asked, you did run well, but what happened? A question for many brothers in Christ and sisters in Christ is, you did run well, what happened? The dance on the Red Sea Exodus is not enough. And what God desires for you today is to live a life that's a constant death, burial, and resurrection. The Apostle Paul, I think it was, said, I die daily. And it wasn't that his sins were needing to be vanquished every day because he was such a sinful guy. But it's like our skin. My skin is in a constant state of renewal. Those dead skin cells, they fall off. And my body the whole time is making new ones. And this transformation, this metamorphosis in us, this transformation that takes place, this renewal that takes place, this death, burial, resurrection that takes place in us is a constant lifetime journey. Not just I checked the box. I checked the box. And I want to tell you something from personal experience. As you get older in the faith and you get older in age, that renewal and that death, burial, and resurrection is not something that slows down. It's something that accelerates. It's something that accelerates. And that is a glorious thing. It's a glorious thing. It's not a thing, well, I'm going to start coasting and enjoying my, whatever years you want to call them, golden years or whatever. But it's a thing that accelerates in our life. And so, I just want to say it's easy to pile the stones up on the bank. But it's something else to take it to where you live. To take it to where you live. And the second thing that the Lord's really pressing in on me, and perhaps this is even more significant, is because this will take care of the first one. If we get this second one right, the first one we won't have to worry about. I don't believe that they were able to carry anything but the stone. I think that the stone was so significant, perhaps the size, perhaps the weight. If you're making a memorial for the nations to see that it's going to be permanent, you're not getting a rock the size of a baseball. I believe it was as much as one man could carry, and I believe God gave him a grace to carry it well, to carry it the 5 or 6 miles. You say, man, I don't know if I can do this my whole life. God will give you a grace where you can. You say, I'll get weary. I'll burn out. Burnout's not in my vocabulary. Burnout does not exist in our household because He gives us a grace. He gives us a grace to run this race and to finish this race. And I believe that they had a grace on their life that they could carry this, but I believe that it was the only thing they could carry. I don't believe that they had a rock right here and I had an armful of stuff under here and all of that, because I believe that there was a focus on them carrying the stone to where it was not a thing of people were looking and saying, what all is Bob carrying? He's got God. He's got, 6 things under that arm and a stone on that, and he's got stuff tied on top of the stone, and he's good at multitasking. I've tried to be a world champion multitasker. I've tried to be a world champion juggler on time, and I deem it as being a good steward. That's what I say. That's my excuse. I want to be a good steward, and I want to be, I want to be good with time management and all that stuff. And those are they're good traits, but they're not the foundation. One thing, as you read and study successful people, whether it's in the business realm or whatever realm they're in, one of the most common characteristics of that person that you will see that goes across the board is they are very focused. And that doesn't matter if it's somebody like Truett Cathy with Chick-fil-A or Berkshire Hathaway or whoever it might be. All of these giants in the business world and the industry and everything, Warren Buffett, whoever, super successful in business, not so successful in family life. But the common trait of these guys is they were really focused. And God wants us to be a people that majors on the one thing and minors on everything else. And majoring on that one thing is carrying the presence of God in our life. And as I said a while ago, if we will get this right, everything else is going to take care of itself. And it's in the Gospel of Matthew, I want to say chapter 6, he says, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And then all these things will be added to you." And I think I know that there was a significance in the fact that these leaders were only able and only willing to carry one thing. Because you know what it did? It placed such a value on the one thing that everybody saw. Everybody that looked and saw them carrying the one thing, they said that must be the most valuable possession that he has, because that's what he's carrying. Of all the things that he could carry, that must be the most valuable possession. Because he didn't let anybody else carry that. He carried it himself. There are things I will let my grandchildren carry, and there are things that I will not let them carry, because I deem it as something that maybe it's too fragile, maybe it's too valuable at this point in their life. And so I think it was significant that, as I said a while ago, I think their children, their grandchildren, their wife, you look at Obed-Edom and the Ark of the Covenant later on, and they come in and they are so focused on carrying this one thing well, that they trust that if I carry this well, I know the rest of my stuff will get there. The rest of my stuff will get there. And I want to finish with just these statements right here. When we focus on carrying his presence, our lives become complete. I want people to look at the fruit of my life. I'm 58, so I'm starting to think a little bit about the entirety of our life and the totality of our life. And, God spoke to me last year. One of my words last year was, I've always said I just wanted to live a well-lived life. That's what we said about my dad, was he lived a well-lived life. We always said, man, we ought to put that on his tombstone and everything. And God challenged me last year on one of my words, and he said, I don't want you to live a well-lived life. I want you to live an extraordinary life. And as I get closer to my going to be with the Lord than my beginning in the physical body, I get thinking about the totality and the entirety of my life and legacy and things like that. And I want as people look at my success, whether it's in business world, family world, being a steward of land or whatever, is they look at that and they say, what's the key to the success? And now people ask me this all the time about the key to success in marriage, the key to success in business and different things and all of that stuff. I don't want them to ever be able to say, man, he was a sharp guy. I don't want them to ever be able to say that he was smart. I don't want them ever be able to say he had a good work ethic. I don't ever want them to be able to say, man, his timing was good, or he was lucky, or whatever, anything like that. I want them to be able to look and only be able to attribute it to one thing, and that's the fact that I carried the presence the whole way. I carried his presence the whole way. I walked with God, and he married himself to me and to my land. And that's the promises of Isaiah 60 and Isaiah 61. As he comes in, he says, I will marry myself to you. I will marry myself to your land. That encompasses all of it. And if I want to tell you something, if he comes in and he marries himself to me, then all my stuff's going to be taken care of. Everything that's not wood, hay, stubble, it's going to be taken care of. I was listening to a minister the other day, and he said, if your world's being shaken right now, he said, maybe it does need to be shaken. Because the things that remain will be the things that are right. They'll be the things that are good. And if it can get shaken off and can get busted up that easily, then you probably don't need it in your life. So I want the weight of the Lord on this word to me is I want to only carry the stone. I want to simply carry his presence. And if I am successful in that, and I carry it the whole way to where I live, then you know what? My marriage is going to flourish. My children, I'm going to be in great relationship with my children. I'm going to be a patriarch of a household. My resources are going to be taken care of. All of these things. When he marries himself to me, I get Jireh. I don't have to aim for Jireh, okay? I don't have to aim for Nisi. I don't have to aim for Shalom. I'm talking about all the different names of God. I don't have to Rapha, any of these. I don't have to aim for that. I simply have to come in and aim for hosting the presence. Carrying that stone, if you will, with this memorial to where I live. Because when that happens, that's when my life is complete and generations are changed. That's when I'm born again and we start seeing it on those all around us. So that's the word I want to leave for you guys today. Contrast the difference. Get in there and study this stuff for yourself. Study it out yourself. Let the Lord speak to you. Man, I had a glorious time in the Lord today before I came. It was so good. Put the worship music on in my ear and just spent time in the Word and meditating on Him and get in there and let God speak to you on this. Don't just kill an army in this season that we're in. Let God do the death, burial, and resurrection in you. And then you won't have a different lifestyle on the other side. You'll be a different man. You'll be a different woman on the other side. And that's when things start to change. So, love you guys. God bless y'all. Y'all have an amazing week. And we'll be getting some more podcasts out to you in the coming days. Thanks.